My question is, what does this group see with SDN? It's almost like the blind man checking out the elephant. Everybody has a different perspective based on where they're sitting. So and this is SDN relative to an enterprise. This is not SDN in the data center. This is not SD-WAN necessarily. I really get SD-WAN. That's an easy path. So what is the migration path of an organization from legacy networking? What are the drivers for the business? Okay, think of different kinds of businesses. What are the drivers for those businesses that would encourage them to go down the path of SDN? Because I see SDN really being like NetOps. There's DevOps. Okay, we need NetOps in order to be able to have the networks work in concert with the DevOps and just in general IT and the progression that IT is moving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think
some people are shaking their head right.
No, I think part of it is figuring out, when we say enterprise, that covers a very large range of sizes of business. And I think by its very nature, the larger the business, the more likely it is probably to start off adopting it.
And by enterprise, I don't mean the unicorns, Google, Facebook.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. And I think that is kind of going to drive it, partly because the bigger the scale of the company, A, the more chance they can throw some resources at NetOps, and B, my feeling is that most people are motivated to do things by saving money. Bottom line, that's what everyone's in business for, is to make money, and the less you
with you about that.
Okay, bring it.
Right. In enterprise IT, no one is interested in saving money, because people are buying products from companies that make 80% gross margin. So that is patently false.
The IT department might not care. I would argue that the people who run the finance of that company care significantly.
Not enough to actually buy cheaper products, though, or cheaper solutions, or to simplify their business process to use cheaper products. Nothing about IT is ever about lower cost or price, or companies like Cisco and EMC and HP wouldn't simply not exist.
I would say that the companies want to save money. The IT organization
the company says it wants to save money.
No, the company does want, well, let me rephrase that. The company wants to make more money one way or another. I think within the IT organization, there's no desire necessarily to save money. What most people would like is to do more with what you've got, or to do clever things, or, just to be able to provide the service to the company better.
There's two ways to make a profit in a company. One way is to not spend your money, aka the difference between your cost and your revenue is widened by having a minimized cost. And the other one is to make more money. Very few businesses focus on reducing their costs. They mostly focus on increasing revenue. All IT is focused on increasing revenue for almost every use case. And clearly that is an industry-wide perspective, because nobody buys cheap products.
Okay. Are you all going to agree with Greg on this? Does anybody want to take this one on?
Can we get back to SDN?
I'm coming back to SDN. Yeah. So just to come back to your point, I think there's three things that SDN does for people that they seem to miss out on. One is there's new type of architectures. SDN enables architectures that couldn't be done before.
Right.
So take, for example, what we looked at today with EVPN VXLAN. You really only can operate that with software over the top. It's impossible to bang the keyboard with your little fingers and make that work. It actually is possible, but you'd be silly to do so, right? Those new architectures are really only possible if there's software doing a lot of the dumb work, which frees you up for other things. The second thing is, a lot of people are still making the assumption that there's only one network in the data center. It's not. Your data center usually has about 5 different networks. One in the DMZ, one in the pre-prod, one in the post-prod, one in the out-of-band management, and then there's a lab network.
Storage.
Right, and a storage network.
Doesn't count. Hey, storage has 2 networks.
So why are we and when people talk about SDN, they think they're going to replace the whole network in a one-up. No. You don't, right? So what you're going to do is take 4 or 5 switches or some new function and do that as an SDN-enabled or a software-enabled thing. Stop treating it like it's a moonshot.
Well, that's why some of the pod designs are really attractive, in my view.
Yes. They're not attractive.
Because they allow you to get started, and it's starter kits and things like that.
If you've got a layer 2 network tree, with a chassis and 3 tiers of wasted money and cable and power, right? Fine. Don't throw it away. It's working for you. It's making revenue and profits. Mm-hmm. It's not costing you any more, except for the maintenance contracts to keep it running. So build your SDN over here and move to it over time. That to me is the greatest mistake that people seeing SDN is they're so frightened, their mind goes into a strange place of psychosis. Don't have to build a data center with 80,000 servers to use SDN. It can be 2 switches with a Python script and start from there and then iterate up over a 10-year period, because your data center network took 20 years of evolution to get where it is today.
So I want to clarify something from a terminology perspective. Like, in my opinion, going back to the topic at hand, which is SDN, I define that kind of topic, that kind of technology, as almost always specific to, I want to do something different than the default with my traffic. I would like to do something based on policy or whatever at the data plane. Does anybody explicitly disagree with that as a definition?
I think it's a component of the definition. I wouldn't say that that's the entire definition. And right, we've been talking about SDN now for years, and we still haven't landed, I think, on what is a solid definition. But I would say that part of that component, though, like when I think SDN and when you're talking about putting it in, is not. It's I think controller based. The idea of unified awareness across an infrastructure, but distributed control and data plane.
My point is, we're not talking about the management layer when we're talking about SDN.
Not talking about only the management layer.
Right.
Yes.
No, I don't think that's my position, is that we're not talking about the management layer at all.
At all?
Because I would define that as just good operations, specifically network automation. And so if you're talking about SDN, like if we're talking about SDN with respect to, I want to do something with my traffic so that I get better utilization of my links, things like that, that's a very pure definition to me. If you're talking about deploying pod architectures and doing so with consistent configurations to make sure that there are no snowflakes in your environment, that's not SDN to me. That's just good ops. And so with respect to SDN, I see in the small to medium enterprise, which I think you're constraining this conversation to, SDN in the WAN makes sense. SDN just about anywhere else, I don't see it personally. I do see it, a tremendous use case for enhanced operations with network automation, which in my mind, again, are 2 entirely different things.
Okay, I
don't want to be a pedant, but...
Okay, I agree with you on the data plane and forwarding there. The other thing that I see is having the applications be able to talk to the network, and the network be able to talk back to the applications. And that communications doesn't exist today.
So what communication would you see value in? What does an app need to tell the network about, or vice versa?
Say for a UC network. Okay, so it says, okay, I need this certain level of QoS, for example,
RSVP.
and be able to dynamically configure that and go make that happen. And then when something happens on the network, have the network be able to tell the UC controller, I just had a burp here, and what I promised you doesn't exist anymore. So you need to go do something else, like maybe take a bunch of your calls and ratchet them down to a lower codec.
Yeah, I've had a long-running discussion on this whole software-defined data center topic, and I agree with Terry here. And to me, the fundamental definition of SDN, I mean, what you're describing sounds very functional to me, but to me, the fundamental definition of SD anything has to be that it's truly integrated and that it's truly hands-off. That the idea to me is that software-defined networking is about automation and integration, not so much how you automate and integrate things. And that's one thing that I've had arguments, some heated arguments about software-defined storage. There's no such thing as software-defined storage in the enterprise because nothing can talk to it, and nothing knows. Not only do they not know what to say, they're not capable of saying it, and there's not even a language for it. SDN, to me, is ideally a way of literally stepping back from the network and letting the network be a tool that the application uses, instead of having it be something that you're hands-on with. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I would go one step further. Nobody will deploy SDN in the sake of SDN, yeah?
Right.
I really loved, Rob from Big Switch. He didn't mention the word SDN, yeah? We have to use, if we have a use case and the underlying technology is SDN, then it is okay, yeah? If in a campus LAN, it helps you to reduce the time that you need to manage your network, then maybe SDN is good for a campus network as well as for the data center.
Yeah.
But I think nobody will deploy SDN in a campus LAN only to have SDN. Yeah.
Well, there are a few
Some people
people.
would do that if they're sold on it. But I mean, to parallel the business driver, which you asked for, right? And the business driver is what we haven't really defined that. We did go into the technical driver, which is to better utilize or better do what you want to do at the data plane, which is what Matt brought up. But why? What are we missing now? Is what I'm asking, and without going into doing SDN for SDN's sake, because I hear that all the time.
Yeah, I think part of the key is going back to what Matt was saying is it's improved management, and I view SDN as policy and config management with a controller. Basic definition, I think apps controlling the network may come in the future, but I think that's almost like beyond SDN. Call it application-driven networking.
Software interface before you can move on to the next.
Yeah, totally. So I think having that single point of integration is important. And I think wireless is something good to see how that was matured over time. And it was the next biggest thing a couple of years ago to migrate from autonomous APs to controller based because it simplified operations. And right now, I just think a lot of network folks haven't experienced what good ops could be with a controller or without a controller. And one option you can say is SDN and one isn't.
Yeah, I put that down as the new life cycle, right? Today we put a switch in and we can't take it out because it's critical in the path and the spanning tree and all that sort of stuff. In a software-defined networking environment, usually switches are compostable. Take it out, throw it away, put it in, because we can move the VMs to the left and to the right, and the host is empty. I can clear an entire switch and replace it if I need to be. That's a whole new life cycle that's never been about before. But key there is that really to make SDN work is once the software is in place, we can now start to integrate like with Kubernetes and Docker. Kubernetes can orchestrate 10,000 containers and their network configuration and their storage and the apps that run in them all as one thing. And networking and storage and servers and VMs are all headed into this combined automation piece. Now that's too big a piece for enterprise to bite off. Right. So, you keep saying there's no definition. There's no definition for software defined, but there's no definition for the word network either, right?
If you look at it,
you can't split hairs, right?
No, it's fair enough.
But the point would be is that the first phase of SDN is these new architectures, leaf spine with overlays and different mechanisms, and some of them use software apps to control them, and everybody's going to go down a different path. And in the campus, it's going to be wired and wireless gets unified. A new device connects to the network. The application at the top decides, there'll be a software-defined wireless that decides if that mobile device is permitted. If it's a guest device, it gets a guest portal. If it's a known device, it gets onto the corporate's software-defined campus, right? Same thing if it appears on the campus network. Same thing's going to happen in the data center and in the WAN. Software-defined allows us to. There's two types of software-defined WANs. There's the software-defined WAN companies doing dynamic path allocation. There's also companies doing dynamic WAN configuration and operations, so router replacement, automated part shipping, zero-touch provisioning of existing, and they're just routers, right? They're not actually doing anything more but that's a massive step forward than a spreadsheet with 3,000 pages of saved configs in it.
Aren't all these things that you're talking about, though, as being software-defined, aren't they just all something that has a controller?
No, the controller's optional. Some technology solutions can use a controller to benefit. Some of them will just use applications. And maybe if you've got a data center with 50 switches, and here's an application talking to all 50 switches. Okay?
I guess I look at it
Is that a controller or is that an app?
Well, I look at it as an application as a controller.
Semantics.
Okay, so in which case DHCP is a controller because it
disagree,
programs
because
IP addresses
you have a
on
controller.
servers.
Your controller is your application.
Yeah.
That's a single-purpose controller, or
So
whatever.
now I have 6 applications.
Right.
So if we
I will talk to the 50 devices. Where's the problem?
Well,
Yeah.
I don't disagree. What I'm saying is, if you're gonna call an application, allow an application to modify, right? Without a central controller in the mix, I think that's possible. But then your application is your controller. Yeah. If you need multiple applications to modify the network, then you need a broker, and your broker is your controller. That's what
I just stopped talking about controllers because they're kind of, if it's there, right? It's an architectural thing that makes sense for some things and not for others.
The mechanism to make it happen.
So for the final part about the apps is, I think the one thing that I've learned about SDN, when you look at all the different 20 or 30 different products that I sort of keep a track of, is visibility, analytics, monitoring. For the last 25 years of my life, I've been putting in visibility tools as an afterthought. They were never part of the budget. They were never part of the product. The vendors weren't serious about them, and they never worked very well. They didn't do a great job. But in software-defined technologies, storage, servers, VMs, like VMware's greatest advantage is vCenter, which actually allows you to see the servers. Is vCenter a controller architecture? Right? So that's the big thing for me in SDN is the visibility, the analytics, the monitoring tools that all of a sudden are fully enabled. And we're moving away from SNMP. We're seeing new telemetry APIs like OpenConfig, like XML APIs, like REST, and configuration tools like Puppet that use Yang models and netconf. This is all just a huge. When we get SDN in, all of a sudden those visibility tools make it so that we can actually know what's going on for the first time.
How can we get SDN in when we can't even agree what SDN is? This is the bit I don't get. If we in this room can't even come close to one definition of SDN, we're screwed. The bottom line is, if you find something, a product, whatever it is, whether it's a centralized controller or it's just a smart fabric or it's a I don't care API, the bottom line is you're going to adopt it because it does something useful for you. Right, it does something you couldn't do before, or that does it better and has some other benefit to you. So that's SD-WAN's selling point. You get rid of the SD and just call it Clever WAN, right? That's the bottom line. I've got a Clever WAN. It does smart stuff. I don't care how. You call it SDN if you want.
Sure.
But I think
Let's have
that's the
definition of
bottom
word
line
network.
on.
Is it an Ethernet switch or is it MPLS?
Well, you can go look it up in a dictionary.
Yeah.
Someone looked it up on Twitter, but
a network is defined as a group of system of interconnected people or things.
right, the German guy just defined the English word for you, Greg.
Think of it. Happy days.
Just remember though, when there is a controller or system, it makes it easier to get telemetry data out of those systems, right? I don't want to say, configure the network, but look at, even UC as an example, as well as wireless. You look at applications like IP Cellular in the past, or E911 applications, or look at RFID tracking or location tracking. A lot of that is made possible now and easier because there's a unified place, to go through. So do we need a controller for SDN? Maybe not. But typically, for me personally, I use the definition of if there's a controller, it's SDN. If it's not, it's for the most part improved operations, which I think could still exist on top of a controller. So
to get back to Terry's initial question here, right, about how does the business consume this, right? Because the problem I see is the business coming and saying we know we need SDN, but they have no idea what it means, right? It's the new buzzword. They want something, and it's hard to explain to them that even if you had SDN, the network might not change, right? We're not delivering any new services necessarily. We might be, from a network perspective, getting better at what we do, but that doesn't mean that we're offering new, crazy layer 2 extension abilities or anything, right? We're just getting better from a network perspective at delivering those services.
More agile.
If the business is coming to us as IT and saying we need SDN,
No, they don't.
what the heck are they reading?
They don't.
They
don't.
They have
say
business problems to solve, and it's up to us to recommend some solution which might or might not involve SDN. I'm tired of talking about SDN. I want to talk about what is the problem that we're trying to solve.
Amen.
Very rare that I hear SDN as the answer. It's just a tool in the toolbox at best. And who cares about what the definition is? Let's get to whatever the ultimate solution is that we need to be buying to solve this specific business problem. That's a context that makes sense to a business.
if there's a problem, automate the fix. Done.
But that's totally my point, though. Is we have a problem, and they're like, well, if we ran our network like Google did and had SDN, then this wouldn't be a problem. And it's no, let's talk about the problem you're having and how we fix that, right? It doesn't matter how you go about doing it. It's
and
just
if the problem is network provisioning is too slow,
right.
Maybe SDN is that answer, and maybe it's some subset of whatever you want to call SDN. It's automation, it's programmatic interfaces, it's integration with an orchestration system that brings the network along as quickly as everything else in the data center is brought along.
But
Talking about SDN is getting boring.
Yeah, to your point, these are all tactical things. These are not value. These solutions that we're talking about don't just provide value because they exist. They have to fit within a plan, a game plan.
Right. Which is why they exist to begin with for the Googles, because of the problems they needed to solve.
Exactly.
And that's the hardest part for networking people because we've never been part of a game plan. We've always been isolated. Network stopped at the Ethernet socket. That was our edge.
Okay. I have a couple points that I'd like, and I know Stephen wants to wrap up here, so I have a couple of points to make about it. I think this has been very interesting and valuable. I agree, Ethan, business drivers. I think
John?
John, that's exactly the point. Is I haven't identified the business drivers. We have healthcare customers, and they asked me to come in, take a look at, and talk to them about SDN, and I couldn't identify something for them that was a driver that said SDN is the solution. And so they're continuing to do, based on my recommendation, do what you're continuing to do, what you've historically done, and just keep in mind what I've told you about SDN. If something comes up that's a driver where SDN is a possible solution, then you will have found it. There is a very interesting paper by the International Multimedia Telecommunications Consortium, IMTC, that talks about a middleware thing that's kind of a controller-based thing. We were talking about, okay, so you have 5 different applications trying to drive one network. Well, this is the middleware that drives the network, and it makes this decision. So that's an interesting data point there. And I've also seen a bunch of people say orchestration is really what SDN is about, and I disagree with that. So it's really not about making networks more agile through orchestration. It's about a whole bunch of these other things as well. So those are my final comments on it.
Thank you, Terry.